And this is the 1631, printed by Robert Barker, the King's printer. It's an octavo, and it's H444 in Herbert's catalog, okay? And this is the famous one known as the Wicked Bible, all right? From 1631, and this is the first one of these printings that is discussed by Kilburn in Dangerous Errors, okay? Now, I'm going to try to zoom in on this for the benefit of those watching online, okay? So here we have the Bible containing the Old and New Testaments, newly translated. We've seen this language a bunch of times, okay? Notice printed at London by Robert Barker, and then it mentions also S signs of John Bill, and then the year is specifically marked 1631 on the title page of this particular edition, all right? Go to page 3. All right, page 3. This edition is known as the Wicked Bible on account of its famous printer error at Exodus 20, verse 14, that omitted the word not from the 7th commandment. Okay? So it's a little blurry there. It's just because I'm zoomed in. Maybe that'll make it better. Now notice, verse 14. So here's verse 13. Thou shalt not kill. Verse 14. Thou shalt commit adultery. Okay? So this particular one gets its name because of the famous printer error here at verse 14 where the word not is left out of the 7th commandment. So this Bible is commanding people to do what? Commit adultery. Thus it becomes known by the nickname the Wicked Bible. Okay? Let's look at the next point. Professor David Norton states the following regarding this famous edition in his book, A Textual History of the King James Bible. He says, quote, the most notorious was, so referring to the errors covered by Kilburn, the most notorious was, of course, the omission of not from the 7th commandment, Exodus 20, verse 14, in the Wicked Bible of 1631, an omission generally taken to have been sabotage perpetrated as part of the ongoing struggle between Barker and Norton. So, there's a couple different ways to look at this. One of them is as an honest printer error. There's other evidence to suggest, though, that this is possibly intentional sabotage of Barker's press. Okay? So we're going to kind of look at that just a little bit. Footnote 29 on page 96 of Norton adds the following details regarding the Wicked Bible. Quote, the edition was burnt and the printers fined 300 pounds, okay? Not the 2,000 or 3,000 pounds Kilburn, too often dependent on rumor reports. So if you read Kilburn, he says it was 2,000 or 3,000 pounds. The actual amount was 300 pounds. Now, as we'll see in a minute, 300 pounds, is that still a lot of money? Still a lot of money. We'll get to that in a minute, okay? Scrivener noted that a single copy is said to survive in the library at Wolfenbüttel. Yeah? Wolfenbüttel. But there is a copy in the Bible Society library. When I opened this to the offending page, a loud crack of thunder erupted outside. So, this is a well-known printer error, and there are very few of these that have survived. Okay? Now, again, the question of whether it's an innocent mistake or an intentional sabotage is sort of the most intriguing thing to consider about this particular edition. A.S. Herbert also has a sizable entry on the Wicked Bible in his catalog. Catalog needs to be in italics, Mike. Catalog, which reads as follows, quote, this edition is known as the Wicked Bible for the error in Exodus 20:14, where the 7th commandment reads, thou shalt commit adultery. The printers are said to have been fined 300 pounds. Now, I did look this up. This is from Wikipedia, so take it with a grain of salt if you want to. But it's an equivalent amount of 63,000 pounds in today's money. Okay? 63,000 pounds in today's money. So the equivalent would be 63,000 pounds in 2023 according to the Wikipedia entry on the Wicked Bible. Okay, so in other words, is this a substantial financial penalty that is going to be levied against Robert Barker's press for printing this particular edition. Okay, so let's read that again. The printers are said to have been fined £300 for the offense. Martin Lucas is sometimes named as Barker's partner in the production of this book, but H.R. Plummer in this Dictionary of Booksellers and Printers, 1614 through 1667, page 24, states that Lucas was not the printer. In all probability, the real printers were Miles, Fletcher, John Haviland, and Robert Young, who controlled many of the London print houses at the time. John Bill I died in 1630, leaving his son John Bill II and all his estates and terms in his part in the King's printing office. See also P.M. Handover, The Wicked Bible, and the King's Printing House, Blackfriars, in the Times London House Journal, December 1958, pages 215 to 218. This suggests that the error was deliberate on the part of the partisan Norton to discredit the Barkers. Kilburn mentions this in his Dangerous Errors. So, in other words, is there some substantial evidence to suggest that the print rivalry here between the Barkers and the Nortons leads to an instance of intentional sabotage so as to undermine the King's printer, Robert Barker? Okay, look at the next paragraph. Peter Hayland, in his Cyprianus Anglicus, London 1668, page 228, under the date 1632, gives the following account of this edition. Quote, His Majesty's printers, at or about this time, had committed a scandalous mistake in our English Bibles by leaving out the word not in the 7th commandment. His Majesty, being made acquainted with it by the Bishop of London, order was given for calling the printers into the High Commission, whereupon evidence of the fact, the whole impression was called in, and the printers deeply fined, as they just merited. Okay, so notice the date on that. That's from 1668. So is there primary source evidence from the time that people were aware of this misprint and how the authorities were dealing with it quite substantially or quite harshly as far as fining the Barkers? Okay. Now, before we go on, does anybody have any comments or questions?
Where that says they were burnt, so did they make people bring them in?
I think they literally burned some of them, yes.
So like 5 went to the local church and said, hey, mine's one of the bad ones, then they...
I don't know exactly how it was executed, but the suggestion is that, yes, they burned these as corrupt.
At least all the commercial stock that was...
The stock, I'm sure there's only like 3 or 4 of them that exist even to this day. So that tells you that they were quite effective in eliminating a lot of them, okay? And as we're going to see in a second, that's possibly not the only possibly not the only egregious error in this particular edition, okay? We'll get to that in a second, yeah.
Just as a side note, it's interesting that the error was realized and made real to the king by the bishop. And I guess that's ironic because the whole point of having scriptures printed in your language is that you could read it. So kind of just more telling that the king himself isn't reading it.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the king has his own copy. To think the king is going to read every edition that comes off every press is maybe a bit of a stretch. But what it tells me is the king executing custodial authority over the text?
Yeah.
And is he calling the printer now to give account of what's gone on here? Okay, and is also the Bishop of London involved? So are the not only high church authorities, but also the king himself involved in this? And it tells me that they were concerned to some degree over regarding the custodial authority they had over the text. Okay, any other comments before we move on?
Because Barker was the king's printer, right?
Correct.
So if Barker screwed up, then that makes the king look bad.
Barker is printing under the king's authority. Now remember what we've already seen. Barker falls into some financial difficulty, right? And so he's forced to take on partners. And so the suggestion then that the Nortons are in struggle with the bills, etc., is related to that partnership going south. And remember, also in a prior lesson, we talked about how this ended up in some litigation even, okay? And then in 1660, one of the bills dies, and so there's speculation that there's intentional sabotage to undermine Robert Barker. Now think about it. What do we already know about the state of the market? Is there a lot of money at stake? So if somebody could wrestle the crown authority to print away from Robert Barker and secure it for themselves, would they have stood to make a lot of money? Yeah, they certainly would have. Okay. Any other questions?
This guy Norton, he wasn't involved in the printing. It says, so I'm wondering how Norton, to suggest the error was delivered on the part of the partisan Norton. On the previous page, it lists all the people involved in the printing, and Norton isn't one of them. So I was wondering how is he involved?
So it's a little technical and complicated, but Norton is involved in the sense that he owns some of these print houses, to my understanding, that are doing the printing. So, and he's one of the partners that the Barkers took on to financially float this when they ran into trouble, okay? So he sees this, theoretically, as an opportunity to undermine Barker and wrestle the rights to print, the sole rights to print away from Barker and then have them for himself. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, next point. Gordon Campbell also comments upon the Wicked Bible in his 2010 publication, Bible, The Story of the King James Version, 1611 to 2011, quote, all the evidence points to a malicious act. This is what Campbell is saying. Possibly by an ally of Norton, neither Barker or Lucas pleaded sabotage as a defense when they were arraigned before the Court of High Commission on 8th of May, 1632. In October, Barker and Lucas were heavily fined £300, and a few months later, the king intervened at the behest of Archbishop Laud, commanding that the fine, quote, be converted to the present buying of Greek letters or type and matrices, right? So the idea there is that the initial fine is 300 what? Pounds. Later on, that fine gets switched to, instead of paying 300 pounds, forcing them to buy Greek typeface. Okay? Which arguably could have been more money than the 300 pounds. I don't know for sure. Okay? So the sentence gets switched from the straight up fine to now forcing them so it says they're being converted to the present buying of Greek letters type. Okay? By ordering Barker and Lucas to print one Greek work a year. So now, instead of paying the 300 pounds, they've got to buy the Greek type, and now they mandatorily, by order of the king, have to print at least one Greek work a year. So think about the ramifications of that, right? Is that now going to be an outlay of time and money and effort to print a work in Greek? So you could argue that's a harsher fine than the straight up money. I don't really know how to do the math on that and figure that out. But this is generally what is understood. Okay. Now here's the next sentence. All copies of the offending Bible, which is now known as the Wicked Bible, were ordered to be destroyed, as a result of which it is now a rare and valuable book. The eventual destination of the fine did not affect Barker's dire financial situation, and although his name continued to appear on title pages, he spent the rest of his life in debtor's prison. Okay? And on 19 August 1644, he yielded his rights to the Bible patent to the Stationers' Company, which granted him a monthly pension of 10 shillings, but he died in, that should say prison, not prison. So, Could you argue that this really caused Barker to suffer financial ruin? All right, and if you view it in that sense, does it make sense that sabotage is potentially the best explanation? All right, now Gordon Campbell certainly thinks that. Others seem to think that too, both at the time and in more secondary sources. Okay, so regarding this edition, Gordon Campbell goes on to state the following quote: "In 1630, the death of Bill and the imprisonment of Norton should have signaled a fresh start for Robert Barker, but the following year disaster struck. An edition of the Bible with the imprint of Barker and Martin Lucas, Bill's executor, omitted the not from the version of the seventh commandment in Exodus 20, and so made adultery compulsory." That's, if it says thou shalt commit adultery, then adultery would be what? Mandatory through that error, right? Now, it has long been thought that this could have been a disastrous printer error, but Ian Gadd has recently noted that the court judgment also says that the edition printed the beginning of Deuteronomy 5:24, now notice this, as the Lord our God hath showed his glory and his great ass. Now think about that.
Sacrilege.
That's sacrilege, right? So this is saying that God is showing his, rear end, right? So notice, I'm not going to read it again because it's, but you get the point, right?
But it was a compliment, wasn't it?
A compliment?
Yeah, it was great.
Oh, Bart. The internet is going to be on fire because of you. Yes, ass would have been donkey, okay? So, man, you guys are like my high school students.
Hey, I've been quiet so far. I had some.
Yeah, I know.
I didn't say anything.
Sheesh. Anyway, it should say greatness, not great fill in the blank, okay? So imagine now this edition has that error in it on top of the one in the commandment. Okay? So no one ever really talks about the one in Deuteronomy 5:24 because it's a lesser known thing, but Campbell is bringing it up. Okay? Now notice what he says afterwards in the next part of that sentence, which is surely mischief rather than error. Like what compositor, proofreader worth his salt is going to allow that to slip through unless somebody did it what? Intentionally is the idea. Now notice what he says. One mistake may be an improbable accident, but two points to sabotage. In 17th century English, ass was a respectable word meaning donkey, not a coarse word meaning buttocks. But the reading nonetheless verges on blasphemy. No copy of a Bible with the great ass misprint is known to survive, though at least 3 copies in Bloomington, Toronto, and Cambridge have a blob of ink over what is likely to be the words great ass. So in other words, somebody did what? They blotted that out. They took ink and they redacted it, okay? So this kind of concludes, I suppose, the conversation regarding the Wicked Bible, and this is the first printing that Kilburn talks about in his circa 1660 piece, Gross Errors. Okay. Now, before we move on to talk about the next one, does anybody have any comments or questions in concluding a conversation about the Wicked Bible?
Just for future discussion, does this have some kind of a impact in future translations like the NIV, that in the New Testament where it replaces, was it the verse in Galatians that says the faith of Christ? I mean, are we talking about the same kind of errors going here where we're taking?
No.
Okay.
We're not talking about anything remotely the same.
Okay.
So you've got 2 options, I guess, with respect to the Wicked Bible. One would be these 2 are honest print errors. The second being, these are intentional sabotage to get the king's printer in trouble, which did happen. He was fined, and does he die in debtor's prison, and is he forced to give up his print patent? Okay, so I'll be honest with you, as I've thought about it, I tend to think that this is sabotage. I don't tend to think this is innocent printer errors. Because when you look at other innocent printer errors, they're not this sort of in your face, right? Calling God a great rear end and saying that you should commit adultery are mistakes that seem to have been made intentionally in strategic areas to maximize outrage